Yes,
And
but
then all the way
those are
up.
the Ponzi's. Those are the Ponzi's who are just adding more blood in the form of debt at the bottom of the pyramid. But who's at the top of the pyramid? Who is it? The Chamber of Commerce in the United States, the Business Chamber of Commerce, that is at the head of the corrupt Ponzi pyramid, the Bernie Madoffication of the U.S. economy? Is it the Council on Foreign Relations? Who's at the head of this ungodly serpent of debt?
Well, it's a quote capitalist system, and so at the top of the pyramid is the biggest capital pools in the world. It's not necessarily American. It's all the capital pools around the world, multi-generational wealth that's hidden in a bunch of LLCs. You see it, you see hundreds of them if you just look them up on the Upper East Side of New York. There's endless, XYZ Capital Partners LLC. Those types of firms have and collectively operating together, some of them operate together, and wield their power to allocate capital.
Right. So let's say J.P. Morgan, they've got something like $90 trillion or 5 times the GDP of America on their books in terms of derivatives, which are unregulated, unaccounted for, just weapons of mass financial destruction that they can whip out and fire at anybody at any time.
Right. Yeah, and so the big sell side banks are some of the most powerful institutions, but even behind them are the senior capital pools. Like you get a glimpse of this in Wall Street too. Oliver Stone's movie, he did a great job of portraying the narcissists that are the CEOs of the banks. But then behind those narcissists are some really old guys walking around with canes, and they are the ones that are watching daddy's money. And that's where a lot of the power comes from. And they use the big sell side banks to launder their money and gain territory, gain claims on assets, and continue multiplying the wealth that they already have. And that's around the world. I mean, it's in New York, San Francisco, Boston, London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Paris, Dubai, Hong Kong. And so this really is the financial elite managing countries and people as an asset on their balance sheet.
Now you describe countries around the world, their banking systems are on the verge of collapse. So how did this happen? I mean, is it by design or by accident?
Well, it's endemic to the design of a debt-based monetary system that's controlled by private capital because they're going to demand exponential returns over time and constantly demand increasing debt as they force governments into debt and corporations into more debt and people because they want their returns so they can enjoy their lobster feasts in peace. And as they continue driving exponential returns, and the people do as well. I mean, everybody's in this together because of the way the monetary system's designed. As it grows exponentially, the debt is going to grow to a point where it's unsustainable. And once it reaches the point where the top capital holders think it's not sustainable, they're going to pull their chips off the table. And then that leaves the banks hollow. And the banks will collapse unless the central banks at that point steal from the people and drop the equity and assets from the people, from the lower classes into the banks to keep them alive. Because as long as you're stuck with this monetary system, the banks are the only source of liquidity for the people. So you're kind of hostage to it, and you have to fill their balance sheets with more assets as the top global capital holders pull their assets out.
What I find remarkable is that, as you point out, the debts are growing exponentially. And with labor markets collapsing and job markets collapsing and with GDP collapsing around the world, the ability to service that debt is shrinking. Tax base in countries like Ireland, in Greece, around Europe is collapsing. Austerity measures are obliterating the ability for economies to pay for this debt. And yet the response of policymakers seem not to try to partition off that debt and to wall it off or to ring fence it or to somehow keep it away from the general economy. All the policies we see today seem to be geared toward allowing that exponentially growing virus of debt destruction to get deeper into every single aspect of the economy by taking away all the regulations, by taking away Glass-Steagall, obviously, by taking away now quantitative easing, talked about in the U.S., for example. That's just a matter of the Federal Reserve opening up the Fed's balance sheet to more of the debt virus.
There's Yeah, I mean, as long as you're stuck with the current monetary system, that's the only option, is to keep trying to expand debt, to keep leveraging the economy. And that's what we witnessed through the last 70 years. We just kept adding new levels of leverage. It started out with something as simple as savings accounts, and then it went to broader M1 and M2 and M3, and then crazy stuff that we've never heard of, that actually unbelievably passes for legitimate notions of liquidity in the economy. But until governments wake up and decide to restructure the basis of the monetary system on something that doesn't require or it isn't owned by private capital holders, that's the only option, is to try to increase leverage.
All right, so you say it isn't owned by private capital owners. So the banking system is owned by private industry, private individuals. It doesn't operate as a utility, as it should. The banking industry should not be that much different from the electrical grid or the water infrastructure. There should be an option, a public option, if you will, for a bank system that operates as a utility, credit on demand at a reasonable rate for those willing to take reasonable risks.
Right. And that's what I'm amazed at the economics profession. It seems like there's only 2 or 3 economists out there that even get debt finance. Steve Keen is one of them in Australia. Michael Hudson gets even more. He gets the power differential that occurs in this type of monetary system, and he refers to the 2 tiers in feudalism. But even Steve Keen will he knows the math, he gets it, and he even calls the banking system, he analogizes it to a drug pusher. Yet, even after saying that, he still endorses the current model of the system, a privately controlled banking system, controlled by foreign capital holders that aren't even, loyal to a nation state and to the people of a country. So I'm amazed that economists aren't willing to step out of that box and say, I can't imagine anything more worthy of being a utility, or more appropriate to be a utility, if it's the equivalent of a drug pusher, as Steve King brilliantly calls it. I think it's a perfect metaphor.